What did your teacher do that you didn't realize until you were older was fricked up? My 4th grade teacher would stand in the bathroom door and watch us pee, because she said boys couldn't be trusted not to pee all over the walls and stuff. My 10th grade science teacher, a 60-year-old man who was never married and didn't have many friends, would hang out with students after school and go to student parties. He would even buy us alcohol, tobacco and marijuana. He was fired for trying to date a 15-year-old student. The music teacher at my elementary school did all kinds of creepy stuff. The one that stands out for me was that every Easter he would have us do the bunny hop, except it mostly consisted of us standing still in a bunny hop pose while he came around to inspect our tails. We knew something wasn't right about him, but as kids we didn't really understand the full extent of the creepiness. It was just something to joke about. A bunch of parents finally complained to the school about him, and shortly afterward, he moved to a different school district, supposedly because he would be able to make more money from private lessons there. Yep, he offered private and home music lessons. A friend of mine took lessons from him briefly, and apparently he insisted on absolute privacy while the lessons were going on. The door had to be closed and her parents weren't allowed to open it. My English teacher seemed like an ordinary guy to me in high school. Only now that I'm an adult I realize he was drunk in most lessons. I heard he was fired after a few years of my graduation. After the Columbine incident, schools started to have all sorts of procedures set up in case of an active shooter incident. At my high school, we were taught if an announcement was made over the PA of a certain fake faculty member was to report to the main office. That was our cue to shelter in place and take shelter in the classrooms. Once a year we had the drill and every time it lasted about 5 minutes. We had a teacher though that was just a little bit off. I had him for a class during 8th period of my junior year, and as time went on, the whole class kind of figured he just was a very serious, quirky kind man. On one particular day, about 10 minutes into class, he tells us all to get under our workstations because he heard the coded announcement. We all hid till the end of the period in our positions until the end of class bell rang. Our classroom was at the end of the school and it was generally a quiet outside, so we never questioned whether this was a drill or not. This happened 2 more times during the year. We eventually just figured that he wanted to test us with his own drills. Looking back on it and by talking to some of my former classmates, turns out he was faking active shooter drills to get the class to shut the frick up at the end of long days. As long as you guys knew they were drills, I find this kind of funny. When I was in elementary, my teacher wanted to show us a video about fire safety, but accidentally opened the wrong file. The whole grade of students cluelessly stared at one man and 3 girls in a hotel room for a few seconds before the teacher closed it. Smokey says, only you can prevent backdoor S9. Grade 4 teacher spent days making our class memorize the lyrics to Simon and Garfunkel's Bridge Over Troubled Water, then had us sing it to her when she was stressed. Often multiple times a day. She was replaced a few weeks before the end of the school year. Years later we learned she had a mental breakdown, which was the reason she was replaced. She never taught again. Almost 30 years later and I still know that song by heart. Almost 30 years. Jesus, life moves pretty fast. That's actually a little sweet, even if it is inappropriate. I had a 6th grade teacher who would choose the best behaved student of the day, always a girl, to give him a shoulder and neck rub. I was just always really jealous that I wasn't the best behaved. Super cringy Mr. B. My 5th grade teacher never let me go to the bathroom when it was apparent I had a UT. I peed my pants every time and she never said or did anything about it. Reminds me of what happened in 5th grade. A boy next to my class pooped during the assembly. Everyone just pushed him and ran away. 1 year later the guy tells me that he had diarrhea and the teacher refused to let him go to the bathroom. She just kept saying no. And his classroom was very close to the toilet. Frick the woman. I still hate her. Crappy as ever. In middle school, I had a math teacher talk about statistics. Somewhere in there, he said that statistically, 3 out of the 7 girls in the class will be strippers at some point in their lifetime. He even had a joke about how all the boys were probably hoping it would be Tina, the hottest girl in the class, not a real name. Everybody laughed. We were actually miffed confused when he was fired later. Looking back, all I can say is wow, how did I miss how wrong that was? This was a Catholic, pay tuition school too. If he kept this up long enough to normalize stuff like this, sometimes it's not noticed until you're out of the setting. It's nearly unbelievable that it can take that big a stick to the head for some people, but also why stuff like this needs to be shut down right away. The more it happens, the more normal it seems. I've posted this before, but still. When I was in elementary school, our PE teacher had a policy that he didn't share with us. Apparently, it was his rule that girls couldn't wear skirts when we were in the gym. If you were wearing a skirt, he would hoist it up to make sure we were wearing shorts underneath. Most girls were not wearing shorts underneath, and he knew it. He did it to the girls, myself included, from kindergarten all the way up until 4th grade. This is disgusting, especially since he got away with it for 4 years. 3rd grade teacher placed all of the boys in class on timeout and had tea time with all the girls for 30 minutes once a week. His reasoning, which he told us, was that boys were mean bullies and girls are nice and should be rewarded. This is one of a dozen or so things that the parents all documented over the course of the year. His first year teaching. Ultimately he was fired. Yikes. Plus, if there's any way to make sure all the boys do hate and bully the girls, it's to punish them for something they haven't done while the girls have to. When I was in 9th grade, my Spanish teacher had us pick Spanish names. I chose Jesus, but she refused to let me have that name, saying I look like Antonio Banderas. So, my name was Antonio. Whenever we would take quizzes or tests, she'd walk the aisles, always stopping at me, resting her hip on my shoulder. Then on a Monday, she had a black eye. Before class, she and I were having a discussion about me turning in late homework. A fellow student comes in, goes to the teacher's desk and says, "Ms. Blank, what happened to your eye?" The teacher looks at the girl, looks at me, and replies, "Antonio and I got into a quarrel over the weekend and he hit me." What the frick? What a weird lady. In the 3rd grade, we used to say the Pledge of Allegiance, USA, every morning before class. Then one day the teacher said that the black students in the class didn't have to get up and say the pledge because they weren't really citizens. As a white kid, I was jealous of not having to do it every morning, but as an adult I think it abhorrent. Mrs. Doobie, if you're reading this, then I'm surprised you're live, you racist sack of crap. In 8th grade we had a unit on the Holocaust. Some students were chosen to be the Jews and had to wear yellow stars, hide during off periods, and get treated pretty crappy by other students. This was all supposed to help kids understand how horrible it all was. Didn't realize until years later how fricked up it was once I really thought about it. That's really crappy, holy frick. Reminds me of the Stanford prison experiment. He had a jar of punishments for whenever you broke one of the rules. Both the punishments and the rules could be created by the students, and if you broke the rules you had to draw a punishment. Rules included everything from insulting another student, to speaking out of turn, to forgetting a pencil. The punishments all centered on public humiliation. And because it was a class of high schoolers given almost full reign, every class devolved into nothing but trying to bait other students into being punished or convincing the teacher they needed to be. Punishments included forcing students to get on hands and knees while pushing a penny across the room with their nose and saying beep beep I'm a Jeep, performing the highly sexual call on me dance, requiring students to scoot up and down every aisle of desks on their butt like a dog while barking the whole time, or making one kid spend an entire class at the front of the room, facing the wall, wearing a literal dunce cap. I forgot a pencil one day and had to stand at the front of the room while every student in the class balled up a piece of paper and threw it at me. One kid threw an entire notebook. I then had to crawl around on the floor and clean up all the trash. The teacher ended up getting reported at the end of the year after I and several other students complained about it unofficially to a different teacher, and while he wasn't fired, the jar of punishments was gone the next year. That's crappy, but I laughed pretty hard when I read beep beep I'm a geep. My 4th grade teacher taught us that sound travels faster than light. A kid called Brian asked, "But don't you see the lightning before you hear the thunder?" I don't remember what her response was, but she ended with, "And that's why sound travels faster than light." My 1st grade teacher picked on a girl who couldn't read well, called her dumb and stuff. The girl was already unpopular and I feel terrible looking back on it. At the time, though, we were all so young, it was just like, well, she's an adult, I guess she can do whatever. I remember in middle school this girl that used to get a lot of crap from some of our classmates. Looking back, I really wish I would have stood up for her or, at the very least, maybe tried to be her friend. Kids can be really mean and hurtful. I used to have homeroom in the morning that was overseen by one of our PE coaches. Not the stumpy middle-aged coach, the young handsome, looks like he almost made it to the majors, coach. They adored him. I mean adored him. And they would all sit on his desk and talk to him and giggle at everything he said. Some of them started doing things like playing with his hair and tugging on his clothes. Before the end of the year, he would have multiple 15-16-year-old girls sitting on his lap over the course of the morning. At the time I just sort of laughed it off, if not a bit jealous even. But now I realize, holy crap, I found out a few years later, he had been fired from his previous school because he and the school nurse got caught banging in a utility closet. Not gonna lie, I'm kind of curious what ended up happening to that dude. I mean, on the bright side, at least it was the school nurse and not a bunch of the female students. 9th grade gym teacher told me it's okay if you sit out of running the mile. It must be hard to run with those melons. I grew up with his daughter too, so it was extra weird. My grade 7 shop teacher had a bottle of Pepsi that, depending on how late in the day shop class was, would get significantly less Pepsi colored. Shockingly, he only had 3 fingers on one hand. Never heard a reason for this. Every time we asked, there was a different story. My favorite story though was, a bunch of us were at the local burger shop. We were in high school at this point, and Mr. L came in. We got to asking him what he was up to now, and he told us he was teaching at the local composite school. If you got expelled etc, you went to comp. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. It was Tuesday at 2ish. When we mentioned this, he grabbed his coat etc and ran out. He came back in 2 minutes later saying, frick those little bastards, and waited for his burger. One of our high school teachers taught us how to tell the difference between vodka and water in a water bottle without opening it. I got caught with a small amount of weed at my high school. While waiting for my parents to come and get me, 2 teachers talked about bending me over and spanking me. Those teachers, a couple years later, were indicted for touching students. When spanking gets kinky on accident, the frick dad. My primary 5 teacher was a mad C. He used to launch blackboard dusters at students with proper force. It'd leave a dust trail in the air. You'd come into class some days praying you wouldn't get smashed by Haley's duster. He was physically abusive to one student in particular who had learning difficulties. The one time that sticks out most to me was when he grabbed said student by the neck, called him a pest and ignoramus. That was his favorite word. I swear he said that 20 times a day, and slammed him onto his desk. We came into class one day and the Führer wasn't there. We had subs for the rest of the year and he never came back. I learned years later that he himself had a breakdown and was now working as a public park attendant. Being Australian, I assumed Mad C meant he was good. Whoops. My HS shop teacher fricked a female student. It's kind of funny since he considered himself the moral authority anytime we used cuss words or something during class. It's kind of funny since he considered himself the moral authority. Many pedophiles do. In 1st grade we were asked what our favorite animal was. I said snake, because you know snakes are cool. The teacher looks over and goes, oh, you can't put snake. It's a reptile, not an animal. 4th grade teacher pulled a chair out from under a mentally disabled student. She also told us a lot of really personal stuff about her marriage. I told my mom and she had me taken out of the class. The teacher protested, so we had a meeting with the principal, wherein I told her all of the things I knew about my teacher's marriage. I got out of the class. Hopefully the teacher also got out of that class. My geometry teacher had a Chinaman on the sun routine where he would put a cone, reminiscent of a stereotypical Chinese hat, and tap dance in front of the class. My 6th grade math teacher was also recently arrested for exposing himself to joggers in a public park, along with a bunch of other old guys. Flash a club? No, it was a flash mob. I had a 2nd grade teacher, not my 2nd grade teacher, but she taught the other 2nd grade class in the adjacent classroom, who used to give students birthday spankings over her knee, and 1 spank for each year, so luckily we're only talking 6 or 7 spanks. After the final spank, You'll get a pinch to help you grow. Never got them myself, but saw it many times. At the time, didn't think much of it. Heck, kids thought it was fun. Looking back on it now, well, dang. You can bet that wouldn't fly these days. I legitimately forgot about birthday spankings until just now. Had this one substitute teacher everybody knew was pretty strange but nothing too alarming. One day when I had him in 6th grade, he walked up behind me at my desk while I was doing a worksheet and asked if I needed help. I said I didn't as I was almost done, but he leaned over me and started reading it anyway. After a few seconds he started telling me what a good job I was doing and began to rub my back. It made me uncomfortable and I left immediately to use the bathroom, but didn't really realize how creepy it was until a while after. I go to a private Christian school. When I was in 1st grade, my class performed the traditional Thanksgiving play which reenacted the interaction between the Pilgrims and the Indians. If you had dark hair and dark skin, you were an Indian. If you had light hair and light skin, you were a Pilgrim. We also sang a song that goes, "Ay, Indians say yo-ho," and teachers would enforce dancing like a chicken as Indian rituals. Later in the song the Indians reply to the Pilgrims with pale face, yes. Also had a pay teacher who used to dress up every year as a big baby and he would hit people on the head and hit girls in the butt with his bottle. He got fired for writing love letters to students. Sounds like something Michael Scott would think up. 4th grade, Mrs. Yana. She read us a story about a teacher murdering their students with poison chalk, which she wrote. Had my hand slapped with a ruler because I was channeling the devil while I drew. Apparently. Thought I was a sinner so I learned to write with my right hand. Thinking back on it, super fricked up. Fun fact, sinistra means left, which is where the word sinister comes from. My 2nd grade teacher was a real witch. I went to school in a not so nice part of AZ, and she was so freaking rude to everyone. I don't know how she wasn't fired. She threw erasers at people, wouldn't let us drink water bottles in the classroom if we brought them from home. Worst of all though, was this girl in our class named Gemma. Gemma was a nice girl deep down but was very moody, most likely on account of some issues at home. One day, our teacher was in a particularly bitchy mood and went through Gemma's backpack. That's where she found a spare pair of undies, likely in the event that Gemma had an issue at school, and she held them up in front of the whole class and said oh. Panty poos. All the boys teased Gemma for the rest of the year and I don't recall her coming back to school after that. Frick you Ms. HUC. Had a choir teacher pick up the smallest boy in the class and scream at him until he was red in the face. I went to the principal. Teacher never came back. I'm grateful you told the principal. Assaulting me because I didn't kiss her. Kindergarten. Back in probably 1979. We had this mousy sissy spacek looking teacher who had it as policy that every kid who came into class first thing in the morning had to kiss her on the cheek. I don't even remember if I did or didn't do it that morning. I know that another kid and I in that class looked very similar. It could have been him that didn't kiss her, or it could have been me because I don't really remember. Anyways, I was sitting in class with my back to the teacher. We had large round tables with maybe 4 kids per table. When class started and she called me out publicly in front of the class that I hadn't kissed her. I was an extremely shy child and this was the worst thing that could have happened. The whole class's attention focused on me. I basically froze and ignored her order for me to come up to her and kiss her in front of the class. I had my feet wrapped around the legs of the chair I was sitting in. She got mad, stormed over to me and tried to yank me out of the chair. The chair went with me and then flew from me to loudly clatter across the floor and I freaked out, bawling, screaming etc etc. She realized she fricked up big time and backed off as I continued to cry. I'm in my 40s now and can still remember it quite vividly. Frick you Mrs. Thompson. We had a teacher make us smell bleach to learn the difference between acids and bases. I got the question correct but my brain cells paid the price. For me it was when my 5th grade teacher, during our unit on the Civil War, had us debate whether or not the South should secede. I know he was trying to get us to understand the economics of the war, but if you tell 10-year-olds to come up with reasons to justify keeping black people enslaved, they will come up with some pretty racist crap. I remember him pulling aside the one black kid in our class afterwards to ask if he was okay to tell him our classmates didn't really mean it when they said that since black people are the color of dirt, it's okay to treat them like dirt. In grade 12, my English teacher told a student she could get out of doing an essay if she tried some extremely powerful hot sauce in front of the class. This stuff even came with a waiver form. She tried it in front of the class. Face turned red, then she puked. Teacher kept his word and she didn't have to write an essay that the rest of the class still had to write. At least he kept his word though. I have a photo of my 5th grade teacher with a male student from my class sitting on his lap during a sleepaway field trip. When we were sophomores in high school, I saw the teacher on the news. He'd been arrested for having a 10-year-old boy passed out drunk in his apartment. When I saw that, I immediately thought of that picture and it became much more sinister. In 7th grade, my algebra teacher got me some mints from Victoria's Secret because she knew I liked mints. I don't recall her buying anything for any of the other students. She also bent over in front of me a few times and was wearing a thong. At the time I was sorta like, hey, whatever. Now it's just kind of weird to think about. Also, my health teacher in 9th grade said that men couldn't be raped. Though this one I did realize was fricked up and I almost flunked the class because I refused to listen to a word she said the entire rest of the time. I grew up in a very rough neighborhood. Projects, public assistance, etc. In middle school music class, we had plastic xylophones without mallets so we used our pens. Anyway, we had that cool teacher who you later learn isn't so cool. If 2 students had an issue, he would have them stand across from each other in the middle of the room and basically have a diss battle, trading you mama jokes for the rest of the period. Oh, also, if a student was getting bullied he would join in and crack jokes on the kid. I knew it was fricked up even then, but now that I'm an educator myself it's frickin' mind-blowing. I kept waiting for this to loop back to the xylophones. I was in 1st grade and my teacher consistently wouldn't give me the same things as the other students. I distinctly remember her passing out glow-in-the-dark vampire teeth for Halloween and she refused to give me one. She said it was because I didn't nap and was playing a possum. If she ever handed out candy, I never got any. I was a chubby kid so I'm pretty sure that was the reason. 9th grade I had a teacher move me directly next to his desk so he could talk to me during class. He did this to every girl who had big boobs. He would constantly walk by and check my work if I had a semi-low cut shirt on. I was back from spring break in high school and previous to that I had a suicide attempt. All my teachers were made aware of the situation so arrangements could be made to help me with school while I was coping. During independent study and science class I was wearing one of my long-sleeved uniform shirts that had crept slightly exposing a bit of my wrist. Nobody noticed until my teacher walked by and grabbed my arm and pulled my sleeve up and loudly said while examining my mutilated forearms, "Wow, where did all this come from?" He knew what happened. That's how my peers found out too. That's just fricked up. My grade 6 teacher read chicken soup for the preteen soul, specifically the parts about shopping for a new bra, getting your first period and all other female puberty related stories to the entire class almost on a daily basis. This doesn't sound terrible on its own, but he was 35 plus and was later disciplined by the board for inappropriately contacting his 11-year-old female students, calling them on their home telephones and asking them sexual questions about their period, French kissing, etc. My younger sister had a teacher who thought improper fractions couldn't be simplified. I believe she was a 3rd grade teacher but she teaches high school now. Those poor kids. I mean she literally thought they couldn't be simplified. Like 6/12 equals 1/2 but 48/12, you were stuck there. Funny enough, I've been teaching a student improper fractions and that's exactly where she's stuck. For 6 months now, I have tried everything. I went to a tiny private school from my 2nd grade year to the 8th, and 6 of those years were spent in the same intermediate classroom with nobody my age. This class was taught by the director of the school, and her idea of teaching was read it in the book and figure it out. The only thing she did was grade papers and write notes on the board for us to copy. If I asked for help in math, she'd hand me a piece of chalk and tell me to go to the board. I'd stand up there all day sometimes, on the same lesson for up to a week. She expected every single page in the textbook to be done at the end of the year, and thus, I was still in my 7th grade math book halfway through 8th grade. She never helped, never explained, just sent me to the chalkboard and accused me of not trying. If I asked to get a drink of water, she'd accuse me of procrastinating, but then turn around and tell me I didn't drink enough and that I was hurting my kidneys. Here's the kicker. Before I went there, I was tested at my old school and was determined to be a gifted student. However that works. By the time I made it out, I'd fallen so far behind it took 2 years of high school to claw my way back to average. In the 4th grade, we did a unit on slavery in the Americas and how bulls it was. Each of us spent a day as a slave and a day as a master. I specifically remember at that age understanding that it was unfair, and had my slave do petty crap like grab my bag when he was already up to grab his and other trivial things. The girl that was my master trashed her desk and told me to clean it right before we were supposed to go to gym or something and then punished me for not finishing her desk. The teacher's take on the subject: see, slavery wasn't fun or fair. I had to miss recess for a week for arguing about it being unfair. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.